Good morning. We are on Samach Gimel Amud Beis 63b1. The last thing we spoke about was Yehoshua and the fact that, if you recall, Yeshua, this angel appears to Yeshua as he's standing around Yericho, outside Yericho, and the angel says to him, he did two things wrong. What were the two things? One, they did not bring the carbon tamid of the afternoon. The carbon tamid is the carbon that's brought in the beginning of every day and the end of every day. Our shacharis and mincha are, according to one opinion, the Gemara, are framed, or I don't know what the word I was looking for. It's basically it's set up as the model for Shachris and Mincha is the carbon tamid. Okay, the carbon tamid was the first carbon in the morning, and the carbon tamid was this last carbon. And because they were busy with the siege of Yericho, they did not do so. But also, the angel says you also prevented the Jewish people from learning Torah. And the angel then Yeshua asked, which one was worse? Which one was worse? Was it the fact that I prevented them from being the carbon tamid, or was the fact that I prevented them from learning Torah? And the angel says, I came now. And the implication of now is because that's the second sin. The second sin was that he prevented them from learning Torah, and therefore we see, and this is what now is being framed explicitly, so we're at the second column, third paragraph. Okay, second column, third paragraph in 63b1. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Inya Mishmei Derav Gadol Talmud Torah Yoser Merkavas Tamidim. So we see that the study of Torah is greater than the offering of the daily karbanos. To Amar Le Atabasi, I have come now. Right? So again, the angel tells Yeshua that the fact that you did not learn Torah, or the fact that you prevented the people from learning Torah, is a greater sin than the fact that you did not bring the carbon tamid. So we do not have a Beis Hamikdash, and there are numerous times in the Gemara where it emphasizes the fact that yes, although we do not have a Beis Hamikdash, there are other things which in some ways are on par, and as the Gemara over here is highlighting, is even greater. And the fact that, we done for the Beis Hamikdash, but knowing that the fact that we're sitting here learning Torah, that is greater than the offering of the daily offering on behalf of the entire community. Okay. Now, one of the things the Gemara mentioned as well yesterday was the fact that Yeshua was also guilty for preventing the Jewish people for being intimate, a husband and wife for being intimate with one another. How so? Because since they did the siege in the evening, and that ensured that the Aron was not in its proper place. And there is a halacha that if the Aron is not in the proper place, then a person is not supposed to be, then a person should not have marital relations during that time. So Yeshua also caused the Jewish people to not be together with their spouses, and we said that was the punishment for that was the fact that he did not have any children. We know that his lineage ended with him. So the Gemara now goes on a tangent based on that. So Amar Barunya Amarav Kol Yashin Bekila, anyone who sleeps in a room Sheish ve'ishto shuriyim ba, in which a man and his wife are staying. Okay, so which, by the way, which kind of common back in the day. Nowadays we all have private rooms, et cetera, et cetera. Back in the day, you have these. You ever go see these old homes? It's like a one room place, maybe two rooms. Like a room and like an attic. But basically, it was quite. It was a little more difficult to give people privacy, and so. The Gemara says a person who sleeps in a room in which a man and his wife are staying, Allah v'kasav omer neshei ami tigarshun mi beis tanugah. The wives of my nation you have chased from the house of their enjoyment. In other words, you're preventing them from being intimate, and therefore there's something wrong with doing so. A person should not be. Essentially, what the Gemara is trying to convey is, although halachically there is no yichud issue, and although again it sounds bizarre to us, like why would in the world would someone be in the same room? But again, back in the day, you'd have many people sleeping in the same house in the same room, but a person sleeping in the same room as a husband or wife is usher. It's something which, I shouldn't say usher, it's a bad thing to do. V'amrav Yosef says, "I feel beishto nida." Even if the wife is a nida, it's still incorrect. Why? Even though they're not going to be intimate, at the end of the day, it's still preventing them from having conversations. It still inhibits them in some way, and therefore it is usher. Rav Amar emishto nidahi tavalo bracha. If the wife is a nida, on the contrary, a blessing should come to him because the person is guarding them from transgressing the laws of nida. However, the Gemara rejects this. 63b2. Still further in the Gemara. Velohi da'ada inna manatre. Who guarded them until this point? In other words, we don't have a responsibility to guard a husband and wife when they are. When they are a nida, they at this point, you assume that they know what they're doing. They're taking care of themselves, and therefore, it's not your position, it's not your business to go ahead and say, oh, she is a nida. By the way, which back in the day was well known. Back in the day, you had different clothing because keep in mind, the implication of tum and tara nowadays is exclusively in regards to intimacy. Back in the day, it was everything, right? Back in the day, you couldn't touch this, you couldn't touch that, right? So a woman would wear certain clothing, as bizarre as it seems to us today, but back in the day, it was something which was much more, it was critical for their way of life, because of what they could and could not come into contact with, and therefore a woman would dress in different clothing in order to demonstrate the fact that she was a nida. So the Gemara says, why did I just say that? I don't remember why. Oh, whatever. The point is that it's saying that a person knows that she is a nida during that time. Says, "Oh, it's okay. I can sleep in the house." The answer is no. It's still incorrect. It's still inappropriate. And don't say, "Oh, you're helping them." They don't need your help. They don't need your help. They're okay. You do you. You mind your own business, and let them do their thing. Bottom line is that a person. It's important the person should not inhibit a husband and wife, even when she is or when she is not a nida. It still is should not be done. Okay. The Gemara now goes back to our discussion of Eruvin chatzeros with a non-Jew living in the same house, in the same courtyard. So let's review the halachos. We saw that when there is a non-Jew living in the courtyard, there's machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and our mayor. Does it one non-Jew, two non-Jews, right? We saw Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says two non-Jews. The basic idea is that when there are non-Jews living in the courtyard, we want to prevent Jews from having neighbors who are non-Jews in these small courtyards, because the fact that it's going to potentially cause them to become too friendly, etc., and that would be problematic. And therefore, what would happen? What has to happen is that the non-Jews, when there are non-Jews in the courtyard, they have to rent their space or their right to the courtyard to the Jews. Right? That was the halacha. Okay, and that's what we do nowadays. Again, for our Eruv to be efficient, we have a big procedure where the people who are empowered to rent out space. So whether it's they have the head fire marshal and they have the governor, whatever, they do this whole procedure where they do a rental every couple of years in order to ensure that we have access to our streets over here. We have such a rental taking place. Okay, but back in the day, you didn't have like such formal structures. You had these small little places, and so we have a story where there is where the following takes place. So mivoa, there was a mavoy. To have a dayer by Lachman bar Ristak. There was a non-Jew by the name of Lachman bar Ristak there. Okay, and because he's there, he prevented the Jews from carrying, from being there. Amrlei. Sorry, did I say two non-Jews? Or I meant, what if one Jew or two Jews live in that courtyard? Right, we said that. Fine. Right, we said that according to Rameir, even if one Jew lives in that courtyard, it's prohibited. And according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, how we paskin, it's two Jews living in that courtyard, right? Because we said one Jew living in the courtyard is very uncommon. Right, is uncommon. Okay. Amrle Agerlan Rishusach. So you have Jewish residents living there, and there's one non-Jew there. Okay, so what do you do in such a case? You say, rent us the mavoi, right? Can we make a rental? Lo agerlahu. Okay, he refused to rent it to them. Okay, so he doesn't want to do so. He didn't want to do so. Now it's interesting. Nowadays, unfortunately, tragically, who usually gets in the way of the Eruv? If there's ever an Eruv issue, it's Jews. It's always Jews. It's always Jews that get in the way. We have many court cases and some along the East Coast of these new communities that pop up, and oftentimes it's Jews who don't want other Jews moving in there. Okay, but this case, back in the day, Lachman bar Ristak, the non-Jew, did not want to rent them place. Okay, so now they're stuck. They can't carry. So they come to the rabbi and they say, "Hey, help us figure this out." Asu Amru Leila Abaye. They come to Abaye and they say, "Amru Lahu." Abaye says, "Okay, I have an idea. Zil batil rushu saichu legabechad. Go relinquish your right to the mavoy in favor of one of you. In other words, make yourselves as if you are one." Okay, this is clearly a bit of a loophole, but basically he's telling them as follows. Instead of seeing yourselves as a bunch of individuals, all of you should say that we're all going to say, Jesse, you have our rights. In other words, we don't have any right. We're all connected to you. We all are going to. We do not have any any unique individual rights. We're basically collapsing all of our rights into you. Whatever you say is going to work because we're all basically subservient to you. You are now the only person in this courtyard. And now, what is that? Technically, what is this? It's now one non-Jew and one Jew. We don't paskin like Rameir. We paskin like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. When it's one Jew and one non-Jew, you don't have to do the rental, right? So if we technically make it as if we don't all have individual rights, but rather we collapse all our rights into one person, we say, okay, I don't have any. I can't decide what goes on the street right now because it's no longer my place. It's Jesse's place. Where we all give our rights to Jesse, then we're all basically making it like it's one person, and therefore we are okay. That's what Abaye suggested. Okay, so then Havile Yachid bimkom Nachri. Then it's like a lone Jew living in the place of an idolater. V'Yachid bimkom Nachri lo aser. And a lone Jew in the place of an idolater, there's no restriction, right? So the bottom line is there is no restriction in such a case. Okay, however, not everyone was so happy with this. Amrulay, they asked Abaye, Midihu taima eladilo shchiach the diary. V'hacha ha ka diary. He says the whole reason that we said that that one Jew and one non-Jew living in the same place is permitted, meaning we don't rule like Rameir, we rule like Rabbi ben Yaakov. The reason we said it's permitted is what? Is because it's uncommon, right? Meaning, really, we don't want any neighbors. We said it's uncommon for one Jew to live with a non-Jew. Over here, let's be honest, right? Is this situation common? Of course it is. There's 7 of us living in this courtyard. There's one non-Jew. So technically, we've all made our rights given over to one person. But at the end of the day, we're all living here. There's a whole bunch of Jews living here with this non-Jew. So it is very common. So, Abaye, technically you helped us, but at the end of the day, it's still a common situation, and therefore it should still be usher, right? You have to be another question. In other words, the whole reason that one Jew and one non-Jew is okay is because it's so uncommon for one Jew to be there. This is not that case. This is not that case. We all live there. Amr Lahu, Abaye says, yeah, that's true. It's uncommon for, the whole thing is that they don't make decrees in case that are uncommon. This is also an uncommon case. It's uncommon for all of us to relinquish our rights to one person. Meaning now Shabbos afternoon, if I want to go ahead and say, hey, I want to go set up my beach chairs in the front yard. I wouldn't be able to do that on my own. I have to go, Jesse, could I put my beach chairs in the front yard? And Jesse would say, no, I don't want to. That's so nice of you. Fine. The point is that, can we have a Karmachman in the streets? That he'd say no. Fine. The point is that, that it's also uncommon. Since it's uncommon, it's true. You're right. The whole reason behind this decree was because we don't want to have these types of neighborhoods. But at the end of the day, the basic principle is that when things are uncommon, the rabbis not make a decree. It's also uncommon for all of us to relinquish our rights. And therefore Abaye says, no, my idea is a good idea. Ask the Gemara further. Azal Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua Amr Lishmai to Kameda Rava. Okay, so this was a big hak. Everyone's talking about Abaye's leniency. So Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, went and he told a ruling of Abaye to Rava. Amr Le Rava says to him, we're now at Samach Dalad Aman Aleph 64a. In Cain, Bitalta Torah's Eruv Meoso Mavoy. But in doing so, you're abolishing the institution of the Eruv from this Mavoy. In other words, what's going to happen is that this non-Jew is probably never going to get around to renting space, and people in this Mavoy are going to forget that you need to have a in other words, it's going to be confusing. You have a whole group of Jews in this place, and there's no Eruv. There's no Eruv, right? And so people are going, right, we have the sensitivity about being concerned that people are not going to know that the concept of Eruv exists. And so, again, which is a real, we in this day really have that as a problem, right? In other words, you speak to your average, 8-year-old kid, and they have no idea what an Eruv is, or 12-year-old, or 15-year-old, or 35-year-old adults. You don't know what an Eruv is because we don't have what they did. In other words, we're really, the whole Eruv that we're dealing with right now is because it would be impossible for us to go around every Erev Shabbos and collect a little bit of food from every person and then set it up. It'd be impossible. But because of that, there's a real concern, and there are some people who therefore don't hold the Eruv for this reason. They say, really, it's good, but people will not know if an Eruv exists, and there's a lot of legitimacy. People go to different communities, they completely forget Eruv, no Eruv, they describe. So back in the day, every Erev Shabbos, you're doing the collection, every Erev Shabbos, you knew there was an Eruv. The same way, you have to, turn the lights off in your fridge or whatever, and turn off the lights in the house. People knew an Eruv existed. So over here, you have the situation, you have 8 Jews living in this courtyard, and so we have this loophole because we've relinquished our rights. But Rava's bothered. He said, people are not going to realize that there's a concept of Eruv. They're going to miss the boat. So,
don't keep this Eruv?
Sorry?
People live here and don't carry?
Yes.
Yep.
Wow.
For this reason. Wow. And I get it. Yeah.
Kids and everything?
Some people make a distinction. Adults do, kids don't, whatever. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, says the Gemara, Arvi. So the Gemara says, okay, so we're going to make them do an Eruv. So in other words, he says, okay, good point. We're going to, so the answer that Rav Huna says to, in defense of Abaye says, okay, so maybe in that community, what they do is every Erev Shabbos, they go ahead and they collect the Eruv, even though they don't really have to, right? Because on the one hand, they've relinquished their rights to Jesse. At the same time, they collect the Eruv in order to ensure that it looks like there's an Eruv. So the Gemara says, Yomu Eruv Moel b'Mukom Nachri. But then the onlooker would say, the observer would say, okay, so wait a second. We're making an Eruv, but we live with this non-Jew, right? How are we doing so? Right? So they'd say, oh, so you're allowed to make an Eruv when they're with one non-Jew. They won't realize that we've all relinquished our rights to Jesse. In other words, there's still going to be details that are missed. They'll say, oh, you can make an Eruv with a non-Jew living there. So the Gemara says, no, D'machri zinan. So he says, no, on the first time we do this, we make an announcement. The reason, really, we don't need to make an Eruv because we've all relinquished our rights to Jesse. And really, if there's one non-Jew and 2+ Jews, you are not allowed to make an Eruv at all. So the reason we're doing this is so we don't forget Eruv. So we'll make that announcement. The Gemara says, Achras Dardiki. Will the proclamation be adequate for the children? In other words, this is going to go on every Shabbos. We don't assume that the non-Jew is going to ever come around, and therefore, so maybe the first Shabbos you made that announcement. You're going to make the announcement every Shabbos? No, you made the announcement the first time. You got up in shul, and the rabbi gave a shir about this. Okay, fine. 10 years from now, is anyone going to remember? No. And the children are going to grow up thinking that they're going to say, okay, there's an Eruv, but there's a non-Jew living here. So next time when I go move in a community where there's two non-Jews and a non-Jew, we can make an Eruv. And we miss out this important halacha that tries to prevent us from assimilation of having neighbors of this nature. Not good. Says the Gemara. Rava says, okay, this is what you got to do. Better suggestion. Your loophole, he says, Abai is not good. Rather, lezel chaminayu likrav lay. Let one person go and develop a relationship with the non-Jew. Okay, it's a little interesting. Okay, fine. Let's keep on reading for a second. I'll just find. So he says, go develop a relationship with the non-Jew. Vili shomine duchta, and then go request from the non-Jew a place in his chutzner. Vilanach mamidi, to store something. In other words, get yourself a right in the non-Jew's courtyard, in the non-Jew's place. In doing so, you become like an employee or a part-time hand. Okay, so basically, by having some rights, you have a certain halachic status of almost like working for him. In other words, by having rights in his courtyard, now you are seen as like an extension of him to some degree. So in other words, become good friends with the non-Jew. Get yourself rights to the part of to part of his courtyard. And a Jewish employee or farmhand working for a non-Jew, no sin eruva v'dayo, he's allowed to give his share of the eruv, and this is sufficient. Okay, tremendous loophole over here that although typically we need a non-Jew to give over to sell his rights, but let's say you have a Jew who has rights to the non-Jew's place, then he could just give over his rights and that would be sufficient. And therefore, befriend the non-Jew, get yourself some rights. How do you get yourself rights? So typically the way to have rights is that you are his like manager or something like that. Over here, no. Even if you just have some rights to parts of his place, again, big leniency. I have rights to part of the non-Jew's place. I could give over because now I have ownership, some quasi-ownership of the space. I could give things over to that now me, the friends of the non-Jew, has some rights to the non-Jew's place. I could give over my rights to the rest of the community, and therefore we now could have a good Eruv. Now it's a little ironic because the whole institution was so that they're not friends. Rav is saying, okay, become friends. Okay, obviously it's a unique situation. Typically we want, but I think it still speaks to the general point over here, and that is that we're trying to make life difficult for you, right? It's not enough to just say, okay, like, hey, non-Jew, can we use it? Yes. Right, you have to something a little bit more elaborate has to happen. Either there has to be a rental, or there has to be some more elaborate friendship that has to develop to the point that you can now use space in his yard. But the point is that a much more complicated type of relationship has to take place in order for the Jews to carry in this place, which again is meant to discourage neighbors to ensure Jewish continuity. Okay, have a great day. We'll pick up tomorrow. Good Chodesh.